Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Tyler, and I'm going to be doing some concept art stuff for you today on the stream. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys have a good time here. So what are we doing this time? Well, as the title implies, we're going to be talking about rendering in logical layers. So one of the things I see students encountering a lot is the dreaded layer chaos. That's what I call it. When we have the freedom in Photoshop to have all kinds of layers doing anything we want, we can sometimes fall victim to layer chaos, which is we have tons of layers doing tons of things and we lose track of them, and it actually starts to hurt us instead of helping us. And I like to keep my files organized, and in addition to that, I like to sort of structure them so that they behave in correlation with the different aspects that make up a render. So the different types of shadows going on, the different highlights, our base colors. So yeah, so that's kind of what the title is implying here, rendering in logical layers. It's sort of like, let's think about what are the elements that make up a render, and then let's structure our Photoshop layers so that they correlate with that. But in order to do all that, and actually this is all leading up to a video that I'll create for CGS, which will be more edited than the live stream here. But in the live stream, you're basically going to see me constructing the components of the things that will go into that video. And of course, we can have fun chatting with each other along the way here. But the first thing that I need to do in order to get this video together is I need to have some kind of object that we can paint. And I figure, well, we'll do just kind of a simple statue, something not too complex. I'm sure you guys saw the last streams, hopefully, where we did a full character, which is just, way more complex, right? There's a lot of things going on there. There's more materials. There's anatomy we have to think about. I mean, we'll think about anatomy a little bit here, but in the last one, it was a lot, and I want to make this a simpler thing so we can kind of break it down, because if you guys are new to concept art and you see these veterans painting these crazy scenes that look realistic, right? All these characters interacting, battle scenes, whatever it is, right? It feels really daunting. Like, how the heck do you even approach that? Are you just supposed to start painting and just kind of copy what you see, or what do you do there? So this is going to attempt to kind of deconstruct that and demystify that a little bit. And I think the other thing worth mentioning here is this is a very broken down process that you can continue to use forever if you'd like, but at some point you might get comfortable enough with this to where you can start to consolidate some of these layers. You can start to do multiple parts of this render simultaneously, and that's kind of what you see veterans doing, where they're painting and things are just sort of like emerging out of the mist magically, and it just looks right. And it's because they're able to think about multiple rendering passes simultaneously because they've just done it so much, right? It's like muscle memory to them. But I want to think about it in a broken down way here. So let's pop over to the chat here. Welcome Abos, welcome Tanyan. Yeah, it'll be available to watch later, absolutely. This stuff gets uploaded to our YouTube, so yeah, you guys can tune in later for sure. Hey Camilla, good to see you. One of my students is here, that's awesome. All right, so enough preambling. Let's start doodling here. I'm just gonna keep it super rough for the moment as I figure out what this statue is gonna look like. And I've got a little bit of a dirty canvas here. I like to start with something that's got a bit of texture on it. It just loosens you up, it's when you've got a bright white, pure, perfectly clean canvas, it kind of creates some tension, right? You feel like you need to be putting marks down that are, really precise, and that's not what we want to be doing. That's not the mentality to have when we start. We want to start with a really kind of loose, broad approach. So anyway, I put a little bit of texture on there, and then I've just got, if we zoom in here, you can see I've got just a rough box that I drew really quick, a cage I'm calling it. Give myself a sense of the objects area in the scene, a little bit of perspective there. Again, we don't have to be super rigid about it for now. All right. Hey Dennis, welcome to the stream. How you guys doing, by the way? How's your week going? Anybody do anything fun over the weekend? I'm so busy during the week, I usually have to spend the weekend getting all my chores done. But I sneak in a little gaming here or there whenever I can. Oh, that's awesome to hear, Dennis. Appreciate the kind words, sir. You guys can see I'm using a brush right now that is just really like rough and kind of crazy. And that's another thing that I do at the beginning, is try to use a brush that's hard to control, because it keeps me thinking big. I'm sure you guys know Bob Ross, and he always talks about using his big giant brush. Same basic concept here. Have a little bit of style to this thing. It's going to be rendered realistically, but I want the shapes to be kind of fun and very simple, very plainer. This is not going to be a realistic head. This is going to be as if an artist was chiseling something very simple out of stone. So this will be majority stone, but I think we'll try to bring in another material in here just for the sake of the demo, so we can demonstrate how you would approach something that has more than one material, because, I mean, let's face it, that's going to be the case quite often in your pieces. You're going to have many materials to deal with. Maybe this guy's got some kind of a beard. So now I'm thinking maybe that base is down further. Maybe we kind of complete the head here, and then we have it come down, and maybe the base is down here. Let's move these cages down. What brush am I using? So this is like an ink brush. I call it an ink brush. It has this kind of a, if you're thinking about like, you know, inking with a brush, right? It has this kind of brush-like quality. So this is just one of my tool presets I've collected over the years here. It's most of these are things that I found online, and some of them I've just tweaked a little bit to be closer to what I want to use. I think this one here is pretty close to the way that I originally found it. So this one's ink rough, and then I have an ink, I call it ink heavy, which is similar, but just a little bit less texture going on. And this rough one is nice to start out with because it's, again, kind of hard to control, which is good. Sounds counterintuitive, right? But you want that. You're working on your portfolio? That's awesome. What kind of stuff are you doing? Are you doing some characters, environments? I actually kind of like where this guy's going. We'll bring a secondary base in here and make the second tier of the base a different material than the top tier. Thinking planar like this is really handy because it forces you to understand the three-dimensionality of all of these choices you're making in the design. And I think what's an interesting realization to make is many times people's first foray into art is sketching and drawing with line. And line is asking you to abstract the world because we don't see the world in line. So sketching the world out is actually kind of asking you to take an extra leap. And yet it's the first kind of way that we tend to approach art is through sketching. So you're giving yourself an extra hurdle right out of the gate. This guy looks so serious. I definitely wouldn't want to invite him to a party. He'd just be in the corner complaining about the snack choices. Just gaffed that center line. That's why you gotta flip often, because you're gonna see stuff. Things you don't want to deal with later in the image. You do any human character design, adding a few props? Sweet, that sounds great. Yeah, without planning rough lines, you have difficulty to color drawings, and that's where it takes the most time to work on, I think. Yeah, color can be real tricky. So yeah, hopefully this this video that I create here will give you an idea about how to approach that potentially, to simplify that, because this is going to make coloring its own stage, so we're not having to think about color while we're thinking about certainly design, but also value and the different elements that make up the value. Right? So it's not just let's paint a grayscale, right? You hear that a lot, like just paint the grayscale first and then colorize it. Well, there's a lot to that. It's not just about painting in grayscale. There's elements that make up a render, so we got to think about the shadows and the highlights, and we have to understand lighting to do that. So this is going to hopefully break that down a bit. Mateo says, "Hi, bro. What are you doing?" Well, bro, I'm drawing a statue. Welcome to the stream. I can sneak a couple other elements in here that'll be a different material. What music radio are you playing? So this is actually just a collection from the YouTube music library that I kind of curated based on stuff that I thought sounded kind of cool for an art stream. And just might turn it up just a little bit here. Let me know how the balance is between my voice and the music. Hopefully you guys can hear everything just fine. Yeah, this is, as you guys know, when you're creating content online here, you got to be careful about copyrighted music and stuff. So the YouTube music library is an awesome resource for that. You have a ton of stuff in there. Maybe we'll give him a little gemstone in his forehead. That can be kind of cool. So we have, I'm thinking right now we've got stone here, and then we'll have some kind of metal for these elements. and then we'll do a gem in there. So we get some 3 materials going on, which should be a good number there to demonstrate these ideas. And then we'll of course have some fun with all of the chiseling and smaller shapes that will be part of the stonework here. Am I drawing with a mouse? No, I have a stylus here, and I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet. Definitely recommend having a tablet to draw and paint with on the computer. I mean, you could try it with a mouse, but that would be quite a challenge. One of the things that this allows you to do with a pen, obviously, aside from it being a natural method of drawing, is that it has pressure sensitivity. So the harder I push, the thicker the line gets. So that modulation there is really important to expression and control of your image. Have I done animation? No, not really. I did some in school way back in the day, but no, not professionally. I've done a little bit of 2D animation, but definitely not 3D animation. It's not really my jam. Okay, I think this is kind of working for me. I think we're gonna leave off these the nasal folds here. I think I just want it to be a bit simpler than that, so we'll go plainer in that area. Let's bring this up a bit. Give him a big twiddly mustache. No, just kidding. Let's not do that. Cool. Let's, I think we can maybe move into some cleaner lines now. Yeah, thanks, Mateo. Appreciate it. Just checking to see if there's any areas where I feel like I'm going to run into some challenges in the render. So there's our nice brow angle there. We'll apply a bit of, just a subtle bit of rounding to this section, I think, depending. Well, maybe it'll be flat. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Okay, cool. So I had set up a few different cages with the plant. Actually, you know what? Since then I was okay with it, now I want to play around with a potential mustache element, or like having the beard come all the way up like this. Do I like that? Okay, yeah, I think that actually is kind of neat. Do we want a bit fancier crown, perhaps? Maybe an extra couple bits right here. Let's go shorter with this one. Oh, that's tangenting with the head, though. Careful with those tangents, guys. Yeah. I think that's definitely working a little better for me. Hey Zane, how's it going? Can't go wrong with the stash. All right, let's do it. Yeah, he could be Jesus. He could be a wizard, a biker, a really medieval nostalgic biker. Blasphemer says stash looks natural. All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Maybe we'll put a little plaque on this stone area here. Some kind of, I mean, we don't really need to care what it says, but we can just imply that there's something important to be said about this item. And it'll be a metal plaque on stone. All right, so we can banish number one from existence here. Well, we'll just hide him. So when you guys are doing iterations, yeah, it's one of the things that's unique about concept art versus like illustration or other mediums is that concept art tells the story of iteration, you know, and showing that iteration is really fun to look at. If you guys have just browsed concept art online, right, it's really cool when you can see, oh, these are all the variations that they were looking at, they were choosing between. Sometimes you even look at them and you think, wow, I actually would have went with that one instead of the one they went with. But it's neat to see that stuff. So when you guys have your thumbnails, don't get rid of that stuff. It's cool, and it can become part of your final presentation too, so you can show people, hey, this was my process, and it just becomes, I think, more interesting. and reveals a little bit about how you were thinking in all of those different stages. So even though we didn't go with Stash Dude, we're gonna just hide him, and he could come out later theoretically. I don't think for this demo we're gonna show that kind of stuff, but if you had a bunch of variations you were doing, then that would be something neat to show at the end there. So as I often like to do, my layers are also a history state. So we'll take everything and duplicate it into a new group here. So we have 0, 1, and 0, 2. This will be a record of where we were at the beginning stages. We can get rid of we'll keep the cage, but I'm going to get rid of the cages I don't need. We just need one. And you're going to become front and center. Calling this rough lines, you could actually also call this underdrawing. Now we're going to do some final lines. So we're going to take this original drawing and drop its opacity down and do some nice final lines on top here. And so this one, I'm switching the brush now to something that is more controlled than our original brush we were using. So we can see that this is the original brush we were using here, and now I'm switching to this brush here, and we can see much more precise. So that's the idea. And sometimes I'll switch over to my Cintiq to do the final lines because just that extra level of precision, and there's a bit more nuance to the marks when you are not bridging that gap between tablet and screen. But we'll make this manage. I've done it with a regular tablet tons of times. Maybe that's kind of a neat shape. Let's pop that in. Yeah. That's too thick. Let's just take our time with this one. I gotta be careful about this overdraw because we don't want it to look nasty. When you have overdraw, meaning you have multiple lines saying what one line can say, then you are calling the viewer's attention to that area saying, hey, look, I screwed up over here. I wasn't sure about myself. So oftentimes it's better to just try to draw one line in like that. And if it doesn't work, just undo it and try again. Yeah, normally I'm on a regular Intuos, so I use it for, I'd say, 99% of what I do. And then the Cintiq just comes in for, like, precision line work, typically, is what I use it for. And when I have to go really fast with that kind of stuff, I'll bring it in. But the Intuos is kind of cool because your hand is not obstructing your view of the image, and it gives you just, I think, is this nice kind of vantage point on your art when you're using a regular tablet. Not a huge fan of that. That edge was terminated there. Let's go with that. And the interesting thing about a Cintiq too is that it starts to get closer to a natural drawing experience with traditional media, and you start to sort of hyper analyze the nuances that are not the same between digital and traditional because it's getting closer. Whereas the tablet just feels like a different approach entirely, and I just approach it. I don't know. My mind sort of flips a switch when I'm using the tablet versus when I'm drawing in my sketchbook. The Cintiq has this weird. It lives in this kind of interesting middle ground where I start to almost become more critical of the shortcomings of digital. Hopefully that makes sense. And you guys are probably noticing I'm getting a little bit questionable with my resolution here. Some of the brushwork is just not coming through as nice as I want. So I'm going to up the resolution of my image a bit here. Now when I get in here, I just get a bit more expression, and you'll notice that brushes behave better with more resolution generally. Do I adjust my smoothing? I'm actually on an older version of Photoshop that doesn't have the smoothing feature. These lines are going to disappear at some point anyway, so I don't have to be super crazy about them, but it's just kind of nice when you've got a lot of clarity on it. Yeah, the Wacom Intuos, or as the company calls it, Wacom Intuos, is I think the most common graphics tablet out there. Although there's some other companies that are doing some cool stuff now in the tablet space. I think if you guys watch YouTube at all, I'm sure you've heard of Huion before, and they've got some pretty decent stuff as well. So if you're looking for a tablet on a budget, then I would say check them out. And we're going to cheat a little bit here. We're just going to use the straight line tool to give us these, or not necessarily the line tool, but the shift click feature to give us some nice straight lines here. Little correction there. Okay, that's not looking good. Let's do that. There we go. Okay, well, all right, we did it. See you guys later. No, just kidding. It's a lot to be done. So we've got the basic lines going on now. So now the next step begins. So let's hide our underdrawing. Oh, let's duplicate this first. Again, history states, right? Moving into stage 3. We're going to turn off the underdrawing. And now we're going to do essentially a mask, which is just a selection region, basically. And we're going to fill in the statue. That way we don't have to worry about staying in the lines. This will be, actually, I need to correct some things first here. This is, we got some symmetry problems going on here. Let's fix that first, shall we, before we actually get into the render here. And it could be that we might want to adjust some of this stuff later. But I want to get most of it figured out now. One thing that's a little bit unfortunate about Liquify is that, see, normally I would kind of shift things around with Liquify, but when you've got really thin lines like this and you liquefy them, it diminishes their darkness, and it's a bit hard to clean it up and get it to look like you originally had it. So I'm avoiding liquefying here, and I'm just using more kind of manual shifting and transforming methods. But Liquify is great when you've got a painted image where the pixels are a bit more forgiving. So I'll show you guys what happens with Liquify. Let's say I wanted to kind of tweak this shape a little bit here, make it a bit taller, which I actually do want to do. If I went in here and I move this, we're going to see that the lines get a bit lighter as we shift it around. Watch. Actually, that one wasn't too bad, because our movement, I think, was we didn't move it around too much. So, but if you do bigger edits, you'll notice that it kind of starts to damage things a bit. You were looking at XP Pen screen tablets. Yeah, that's right. That's another brand that I forgot about. I don't know too much about XP Pen, but I have seen advertisements for them. If anybody has some experience with XP Pen, let us know what you think. All right, back to that masking situation. So we're gonna use a light gray here. And we're going to use a brush that doesn't have any fancy textures or stuff going on, because this is, again, a mask. This is a functional layer. It's very utility. There's no expression needed in this. We're not going to see it. Well, we are going to see it because we're going to see the gray, but we're not going to see any texture or edge work or anything. So we're just using a simple flat brush here that has some shape dynamics on, where we can push harder to get a wider stroke. And I find that nice when we're doing masks, because It lets you get into the small areas easily. Oops. And also paint the larger areas quickly. And in addition to the shape dynamics on the brush, I have the increase and decrease brush size hotkeys bound to some really easy access buttons on my keyboard, because I'm changing brush size quite often and it needs to be quick. All right, so there is our mask layer, which is going to become essentially our core light layer. This is where we start to get into the logical layers for rendering a piece based on the visual elements that make up an image. So we've got our different kinds of shadows, we've got our highlights, right? We've got the local values of the object, the local colors of the object. Then we have the environment imparting its colors onto the object. There's a lot of pieces there, so we're not going to do any of that at the same time. We're going to do each in its own step. So this mask layer here is going to represent, for the moment, the local value of our object. So we're thinking about this like it is basically a flat gray material. It's just it's going to have you know, no specular highlights, no shininess, no reflectivity going on right now. We're just thinking about it as if it's all just one basic gray material, right? Super simple. We don't have to worry about how light or dark any individual component is. All we're thinking about in the next step here is, where is our light coming from, and what are the shadows that are going to cast from that light onto the object based on our design, right? So let's put that in now. So our light source in the scene is going to be coming from in here, kind of in the front. So if we want it to be like really, you know, kind of give a sense of the direction of the light here, you know, this is kind of what's going on. So it's kind of casting from this upper right direction onto the object there. And now we're going to do what I call the graphic shadows pass. So why do I call it graphic shadows? Well, it's because we're thinking about the shadows in a very graphical way. We're going to use a hard edge brush, and we're not going to worry about creating any halftones at this stage. So halftones are all of those subtle gradations of value that happen as the form turns away from the light, blending essentially, right? And we're not worried about halftones here. We're just worried about finding where the light ends and the shadow begins, which can take a bit of mental processing. You know, in some cases it's difficult to imagine where that edge happens, especially on something that feels rounded, right? It's like, well, it's a rounded surface. Shouldn't that light just sort of, you know, blend smoothly over it? Well, it does ultimately, but it ends more abruptly than you think it does. And so this graphic shadows process really gets you thinking in the right way about that. And we can go into that more, and I think the final video will probably go into a bit more detail about this, but essentially it has to do with the Lambert emission scale, which is something you guys can Google if you want to learn about it. But it's basically to say that those values across the surface they do not transition in a linear way. So you might be thinking, okay, well, the light's up here. Let me do some drawings. So the light's, let's say, over here, and the darkness is over here, and you're thinking that this is going to be a linear gradation of value from the dark point to the light point. That's not how it works, which is kind of counterintuitive. It actually, the way the light works is it has a kind of a cosine fall off to where there's a more of an abrupt transition between these. We get this sort of it's like an exponential fall off of the light. So this graphic shadows approach gets you more accurate to how that light really behaves. All right, so let's do that pass now. We're on this graphic shadows layer. We're going to use our mask layer, which I'm going to rename to core light. Let's see, what were we on? Last step here was this. This is going to be let's do a new group here. Again, we're doing history states, so let's do this. We're kind of in the next stage of the image, right? So we're going to copy everything over again. Now we're in step 4. Now this mask layer turns into our core light layer, or you can even call it the local value layer. Different people call this stuff different things. That's the other thing. So you got to kind of figure out what name makes sense for you so you understand what it is in your own process. Okay, so this graphic shadows layer here, we're going to set to multiply. And we're going to turn its opacity to 50%. And the cool thing about this is, with the shadows being on their own layer, we can adjust how intense they are independently. And that's cool because the intensity of the shadows is based on the amount of ambient light in the scene. Right now, our scene has a very light colored background, which is implying that there's a lot of ambient light in the scene, right? We're going to get a lot of bounce light going on. If we wanted to change our mind later and make the scene very dark, if we made this layer back here, the background, really dark, we would be reducing the amount of ambient light in the scene, which would make our shadows darker with them being on a separate layer. We can do that. We have the power to do that, right? So that's cool. And in fact, I might actually lower this a bit in preparation, because that super light background I think will end up being a bit darker in the final. So let's just darken it now and kind of prep ourselves for that. Okay, graphic shadows. We don't want to have to worry about painting in the lines, painting inside the form. So we can use our mask layer here by control clicking the thumbnail. You can see we've got our crawling ants around that selection now, and applying it as a layer mask to the graphic shadows layer. So now you can paint very freely and not worry about going outside the lines. It all stays inside. Hey, thanks, Mauricio. Glad you're finding it helpful. So this is like I said, each step here we're trying to simplify it so we can really focus on what is the hardest part of this particular phase, right? The hardest part of this phase is thinking about the shapes of our design, the direction of the light, and the turning edge, where the light ends on these forms. It's a bit of a puzzle, right? Each one of these phases is a puzzle, and if you don't know where to start, it can be hard, like, well, I'm not sure. Go for the ones that seem most obvious to you first. Some of them are going to be more obvious than others. Some of them are going to be quite tricky. So as an example here, one of them that I think is fairly clear to us is this shadow underneath this lip here. Why not start there, right? This is a super clear edge that we'll be getting shadowing based on our light direction. And another one here. Okay, so now we've got a little tricky spot there. This edge here that's a 45-degree angle, and we can make a choice there. We can put it in shadow, we can not. Let's see. I'm gonna leave it unshadowed for now. We can kind of keep working stuff in. So let's now do the shadow under the nose. That's a pretty easy one, right? A shadow for the this top lip here. Going to be some shadow on the underside of the top lid. Now let's talk for a moment about the different kinds of shadows. We've got 3 different kinds of shadows. So We have form shadows, we have cast shadows, and we have ambient occlusion, which sounds real fancy, but it's well, I'll talk about it in a bit here. Those are the three kinds of shadows that exist. And in this pass we're doing right now, the graphic shadows pass, we're only worried about these two right here. So the form shadows are the ones that are rolling across the form, and the cast shadows are where we have an object occluding the light and casting its shape down on something behind it. So those are the two we're thinking about. If you want, if it's too much to even do this, right, you can even break that into different parts. I feel like this is still broken down enough to where I can do those two at the same time. It's just an efficiency thing for me. But you can absolutely approach those as separate layers if you'd like. But the ambient occlusion I do not in this pass, because the ambient occlusion shadows are they're a soft shadow that isn't expressed well with this particular approach. If we do it with this sort of hard edge, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for how ambient occlusion presents itself in real life. So we're going to do that as a separate pass. But this one here, we're taking care of the first two types of shadows. All right, so this one here we're going to do, oops, let's go back to our proper layer here. Ambient occlusion equals contact shadows. I actually haven't heard that phrase before. It could be. Sounds cool. I can dig it. Yeah, interchangeably. Okay, well, there you go. See, you learn something every day. There you go. Contact shadows, ambient occlusion. And I have a background in 3D, so I will say that some of these concepts and things came a little easier to me because of my background in 3D. So I wanted to try and kind of present those to everybody. Okay, so here we're getting into some cast shadows, right? This brow casting its shape down onto the eye here. I'm gonna do some cast shadow from the nose. And we're gonna just toss that lower lid in shadow there. And again, this is a puzzle. We're gonna work one piece at a time, and with each piece that we put in, we gain extra clarity on the image as a whole, and the trickier shadows will become easier to place. Process of elimination there. And you don't always have to follow your internal lines precisely. You can kind of tweak them a bit as you go. If you see something that you want to be just a bit different, don't feel like you're super locked in. The only shape that we're really locked into is that outer shape, you know, but hopefully that one you don't feel like you need to change, which is why we tried to have a good deal of scrutiny on the overall shape before we got into this pass. Would you recommend learning some beginner 3D skills? You're in the concept art course right now, and if 3D is becoming more common, but I'm not sure if I should split my focus. That's a great question. I think that it's fairly easy to get a very surface understanding of 3D without having to feel like you're really splitting your focus. And 3D is a huge part of concept art these days. What I think is important to know is the foundational aspects of art first, before you dive into 3D, because sometimes what happens is the tools prevent you from learning critical things. For example, there are some artists who are really comfortable with photo integration in their work, but if you ask them to draw a person from their head, they'd be incapable. And that's not a great place to be in, right? You want to have those foundational skills. So that's why I'm always hesitant with my students to recommend they deep dive into some of these things until they've got a good handle on the foundational skills. But once you have a good handle on those, it is absolutely a really cool and useful thing to incorporate into your workflow, and you don't have to deep dive too far to get benefits out of it. Especially the tools, the way they've evolved these days. It used to be, I think, much more difficult to get into it. It was incredibly technical, and these days there's so much refinement that's happened to the software. It's easier to dive into. As an example, ZBrush, right? ZBrush is such a huge, useful tool to digital sculpting and to do the work that ZBrush does back in the day before ZBrush was really hard. I'm going to make a choice to shadow this piece here. We may change our mind later, but that's okay. We have the power to do that. Just give me a moment here while I reposition myself. Good to shift your posture occasionally to keep yourself ergonomically sound while you're working here. Let's adjust. Okay. I kind of have two postures when I'm working. I have the sort of leaned back approach, and then I have the like intense let's lean forward approach. So now I'm all super close to you guys. You see how this is kind of a puzzle? Filling in the puzzle. Feel out the shape of that nose projecting outward. So this shadow here under the brow, that's the kind of core part of that shadow, right? But then we're going to get some shadow casting down from the brow onto this section, and this eye casting shadow back like this. And good to just observe reality and paint from reference if you guys are struggling to understand some of these concepts here, right? Like you can see that there is a bit of knowledge that I'm bringing to this that helps. But it's vastly simpler than trying to do everything at once. Okay, so this plane is shadowed, and then it's going to be casting a bit of shadow down below it. So we're going to cast a bit of that shadow outward. Same here. This is going to be shadowing beyond its edge there. Same here. See, so yes, we could have dove in there and just shadowed all that really quickly, but by thinking about it in logical steps, it's a lot more accurate. Form shadow here on this gem. Now it's going to be casting a shadow beyond its edge, so we'll paint a bit beyond that. So you guys see these shadows coming in here? Things are starting to feel three-dimensional, right? It's kind of neat. All right. Obvious shadows first. This is a pretty clear shadow to me, this front edge of the hood. So let's shadow this section. Yeah, no problem. Learning how to block out some stuff in Blender is pretty easy and very helpful for all environment-related stuff. Also helps a lot for vehicles and hard surface stuff, just having some boxes to draw over. Yeah, that is a super helpful aspect of 3D, is to assist with perspective and some of those technical aspects of the art that you might want to accelerate with the help of some of those tools. I mean, you can see in Photoshop here, even we're using some of those to draw straight lines, right? Duplicate things, a bit of warping. So 3D block-in of those things you mentioned is along the same lines. Okay, here I was a little sloppy with this definition, right? So this is where some of those things, if we don't work it out, we can run into some trouble spots. But that's fine. We have a little puzzle to solve. How do we want that to transition? And we can see that it's also starting to shift into the light there, so does it maybe stop here? Do we want to have that transition into light? I think that makes sense. And then let's create a plane here, right from this edge into this section here. And we could shadow this one maybe. Thinking about it. I'm going one plane at a time, one form at a time here to make these choices. It's safe to say we're going to have this area behind the head in shadow. And now let's do the entire area behind the head on this side, and then we might erase away a little bit of it if we feel like the light is going to cast beyond and hit the inner edge of that hood there. And I can guarantee you that we're definitely going to have a bit of that getting erased, but let's fill it in completely for the moment. And this graphic pass too is cool because it helps you evaluate where you're going to have readability issues in your image, because this is essentially what people are going to see first. Before anything else in the image, they're going to notice these graphic light and shadow elements of the piece. If things aren't reading here, then you know that you have some kind of challenge to deal with other tools in your toolkit, such as maybe hue transition, right? Texture, all of these things can help alleviate some of those puzzles. But if you can solve a lot of them here, that's of course going to make your life easier and strengthen the piece. Okay, so there's that distant edge, and think about this head casting its shadow onto the inside of the hood there, and maybe stopping right about there. So let's have the light hit that section there, and then we're going to have this distant edge and shadow. You can see I'm inventing a little bit of an edge there that was not present in the line art, which is totally fine. Hey, Pigeons, welcome. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. You just joined. How am I organizing the layers for this piece? Yeah, so that's the whole thing here with this demo is organizing your layers so that they make sense with the structure of how a render comes together. You know, we've got our shadows, we've got our base value here, and then we're working from our base drawing. So what I would say is I've had some commentary about that structure, so I think it would be good for you to go back and just maybe rewatch some of the stream from earlier, and I give a good breakdown of the thought process on this. That was kind of a brief overview of what we're doing here. Okay, now we're going to do the shadow casting from his epic beard down onto his neck. So I'll just bring this, do a bit of a cast shadow from there. And this is protruding quite far, so we can imagine that that's going to be giving us quite a dramatic shadow down onto the neck area here. So there we get into a little bit of a tricky spot, right? Do we want to have that shadow cast up over that stuff? Well, maybe. This is where we can get into some just artistic discretion about choices we're making. And no one is going to be coming in here and sort of like scientifically mapping out your image and calling you out on something that's a little bit off. At least I don't think so. I hope not. So we're going with what's working logically from a visual standpoint. So there's that lower lip coming in. And I want to give this the shape of the chin here a form shadow. So let's bring it out like that. Yeah, absolutely, Mauricio. If it reads well at this stage, then you know you're probably going to have a decent read later. So now we're going to do a bit of cast shadow from that hood onto the face here. And of course down onto the neck. I'm going to just put that all in shadow there. Just going to simplify that whole situation for myself. Okay, let's do this nice dramatic shadow of the hood onto the base. I think I'm going to use the lasso to give myself a bit of an easier time with some of this stuff here. So we can look at our navigator too as a kind of constant reminder of how things are reading from a distance. And your eyes are smarter than your brain when it comes to visuals, so you'll have kind of this instinct about whether things are feeling like they're working right or not. We're very adept at evaluating shape, value, and so you can kind of glance over here and just see like, well, how's this feeling? And we've got some subtle planes that are trickier to deal with. We have, this plane here, for example, this one and this one could use some value separation, this cheek plane here. And so we'll do an extra pass that is going to just help us with a couple of those slightly trickier angles. But we're really trying to reduce the complexity of this, and we're trying to do as much as we can with just one shadow pass here. But it's important to remember that these angles that are in question, that are kind of in an in-between state, it's better to have those be closer to being in the lit value range than in the shadow value range. So let's do that now. Let's do I'll call them half shadows. That's probably fine. And important to note, I'm using flat, pure black here, and I'm just controlling how dark it is based on the layer's opacity, right? So that way we have full control over this. See, we can go 100% with that, and now we have super dramatic, comic book shadows, right? Or we could go like with a very bright daylight scene, where we have a lot of ambient light from the sun bouncing in, and these shadows become very light. See, we've got a lot of control now over this, which is awesome. Let's grab a couple of these other sections and get them resolved. I'm going to go with let's go with a 15% shadow on this and see how that's looking. I can already tell you this is too dark, but we just have it set to this so we can see what we're doing. Yeah, it's pretty non-destructive. We don't really collapse things down until we get later on in the piece, when we have extreme confidence in all of the stuff we've put in, and we're going for that sort of raw pass where we bring in that energy and the final brush marks. Okay, let's lower the opacity of this layer down a bit here. We're going to go for something more along that region. sure this is set to multiply. Forgot to do that. Make sure your shadow layers are set to multiply, because that's going to make sure they integrate properly with the passes below. So let's select the inverse of this, so we don't have to worry about painting in our over on top of our first shadow pass. Just going to drop this down because it's pushed back and further away from the light. So we'll just kind of get this in there. Sure, let's distinguish that plane there. I'm going to push back all of this. And we'll push back all of this stuff too. There's that weird angle we were dealing with earlier that we didn't care for. Okay, sure. Let's just give a little bit of definition to that section there. All right, so that's giving us a pretty good idea of what's going on with those shadows there. Okay, so let's do the Ambient Occlusion pass. Again, use our mask here to constrain it to the shape. And now I'm going to switch over to a brush that is better at representing ambient occlusion than what we've been using, which was that hard edge brush. I'm going to use what I call my palette knife brush. I'll show you guys what this looks like. So that's sort of this brush here. See, it's got a hard edge and a soft edge, and we're going to get a nice expression for the ways those ambient occlusion shadows look. Now, the ambient occlusion is, if we break down those words, it is the ambient light getting occluded. So all of the light from the environment is having trouble getting into certain spots on our design here. Basically the kind of crevices and cracks, right? We do get ambient occlusion spilling out in a more broad way from those corners. I mean, it's likely you can even just look up at the ceiling wherever you are right now and see slight gradations of shadow from the crevices, right? We have the kind of deepest shadow in the crevice, and then we have a bit of a fall off from those sections, and that's just the way that ambient light gradates as it gets into those tighter spots. And it's very soft. We can see that it has a very soft fall off. So that's what this layer is going to do. But if you think about it, our line pass, which again, a line, the way we express reality with line is abstracted, right? Nothing has outlines. But aspects of our sketch do kind of feel like ambient occlusion, right? Like they feel like they're the darkest crevices in many areas. Only certain parts, right? Other parts don't make sense for that. For example, let's analyze our sketch. If we look at this line right here, that doesn't really make sense for ambient occlusion, right? We've got where the light is coming from. This is kind of an edge that's standing in front and clearly getting hit by the light. We don't really have a reason to have ambient occlusion on this edge here. So that's an area where the sketch is an abstraction of reality. It is a stylization, and it is flattening the form, actually, in fact. So that's something that we wouldn't have represented in the ambient occlusion layer. Whereas this line of our sketch seems to make a good amount of sense for ambient occlusion, right? Like this is being blocked by the light. It's kind of in this area where there's two forms meeting up together. So you can see, interestingly enough, that the sketch does represent, in a way, an abstraction of the ambient occlusion in the scene. There is a trick you can do to accelerate the ambient occlusion pass using your line art. It's a bit of a hack. It's not something that you're going to want to just use without any edits to it, but it can sometimes fast forward the process a bit and make it feel like you're not doing the same thing twice, reducing the sense of redundancy to these two steps. So here's our line pass, and it's cool to look at it without the lines, right? Starts to feel like we're looking at some kind of a 3D render or something, right? Isn't that the point? The whole point is to get our 2D artworks to feel three-dimensional. But anyway, so the final lines here, we've got these. Let's duplicate them. And let's increase their opacity to 100%. And we're going to blur them. And what this does is it diffuses the quality of our line art, right? It kind of blurs it out, diffuses it out, starts to feel a bit more like ambient occlusion, right? But again, as I said before, it's in places where we don't want it. So we need to only show parts of the sketch as a start to this layer. So how do we do that? Well, let's put a mask on this layer, and let's fill the mask with black so that we hide everything. And now we can paint into the mask with white to reveal only certain areas of the sketch, essentially wherever we want there to be ambient occlusion. I'm going to turn on the final lines again, but I'm going to reduce the amount we're seeing them to just very subtly, so that way we get a sense of how much ambient occlusion we're bringing into the scene. And now you can see that we're just basically revealing parts of that blurred sketch, giving us some free ambient occlusion. This is going to get intensified quite a bit, though. We're just doing a quick pass here. And then I'm going to manually paint in ambient occlusion myself in a more dramatic way. It's just kind of showing you guys a little bit of a trick. If you guys are in a rush and you want to reduce the redundancy a bit, then this is something kind of neat to do. Process too requires just a bit of kind of self-restraint, because it can feel like it requires a lot of control and like we're not doing anything glamorous, right? It's this very kind of methodical process, but I assure you the payoff is worth it. And we get to the final stages of this and it's all feeling really solid. can start to have sort of more fun with it. All right, I think we've gotten enough out of that trick there, so let's kind of get rid of the so you can see there's some of the ambient occlusion we brought through, but now let's continue to paint more of that on our own with that brush that I mentioned before, the palette knife brush. You can see we're getting quite a bit more in some of these areas, which is definitely what we're wanting. The other thing worth mentioning about AO is that it is definitely the darkest part of the piece. So this is the place to use your darker values if you're going to use them. Unless, of course, you've got some objects in your scene that are like Vanta black or something crazy, then sure, those could be darker, right? This is where we can get a bit of that, the spill, the kind of gradual spill away from these edges. Now remember, don't confuse this with the form shadows, right? This is just that area spilling away from the cracks and crevices. And you'll notice too, I'm blending them a bit with the smudge tool. So that's just, I have just a smudge tool here that is really soft, just kind of dithers things easily. So if we get something that we need to kind of blur out, we can easily use the smudge brush to soften it up, which is a really handy feature. The other thing you're going to notice too about this pass with the ambient occlusion is that you could spend quite a bit of time if you wanted to on this phase. And in all honesty, the longer you spend on this phase, the crazier your piece is going to look, the more realistic that render is going to be. So if you've got the patience, this is a good step to spend some time on. And we'll give it some good attention here. You want to be a detective and be looking for these intersection points of your forms. This little T intersection here, that's a clue that you should have ambient occlusion there generally. And as we were doing the graphic shadows pass, I mentioned you do the ones that are obvious to you first because it's a puzzle. Same thing with ambient occlusion. Find the ones that make sense to you and do those first. So, you know, this one right here, underneath the chin, we certainly could justify some ambient occlusion under there, right? Plenty of it. Yeah, Zane, this is definitely one that can take some time, but it's worth it for sure. See, there's a tendency to want to put shadow like over here. Actually, let me put the mask back on this thing. Tendency to put shadow over here, right? Don't do that. That's form shadows. That's shadow that's darker as it's passing over the light. That's not ambient occlusion over there necessarily. I mean, we could maybe say that there's a bit less ambience because of the light, and it's just, I like to keep it really tight to these crevices because it is logical. It's just easy to kind of understand the thought process there. Whereas if we start to do stuff like this and gradate that stuff, it's those are halftones, but well, they're not halftones exactly, but it's complicating it unnecessarily. So don't do that. I could get into a little bit more of the reasoning behind that, but just you gotta trust me on some of this stuff. Just keep it to the crevices. They're very, very obvious. Let's turn off our lines and see how this is reading. Cool. Definitely want to bring in more ambient occlusion underneath this section here. So we're going to use the lasso tool. And when you have a selection made, you can hit Control H to hide the selection even though it's still active. Will let us smoke this in really clearly. Let's take off our lines and really observe what's going on here. Yep, that's looking good. Something else cool about doing the ambient occlusion as its own layer is that we can duplicate the ambient occlusion if we want to intensify it. So you just duplicate it and there we go. Our subtle ambient occlusion pass can feel even more intense very quickly. We're going to wait on that though. It is pretty common that I end up using a duplicate of the AO pass though, just because I have a very subtle hand at this, and I end up wanting to kind of boost it up. Oh my gosh, you guys, time is just disappearing on us here. But don't worry, I'm not going to do anything on this outside of the stream. So you guys, if you tune in Thursday, right? Yeah, Thursday. We'll be continuing this. And we'll keep working through the ambient occlusion. And then the next step after that is going to be creating the halftones. So in that stage, what we do is we take the graphic shadows and we use the smudge tool to blend them. Blend the edges of the form shadows, which gives us that curvature, or it gives us those halftones. And then we'll start blocking in some of the local values underneath all this stuff. We'll establish some of the colors, right? Then we'll get into specularity, the specific reflectivity of each of the surfaces, some of the textures. Yeah, it's going to be fun. And you guys can see there's little artifacts, right? Like this is not super clean. There's little bumps and stuff like that. We can fix that stuff later. It's close enough. There'll be a final pass on this where we can do that cleanup stage. I'm not super worried about it. The lasso tool can be a huge help here because the nature of these ambient occlusion shadows is that they're oftentimes starting from kind of a hard edge and then fading outward from that hard edge. Funny, we actually forgot a cast shadow over there. Let's do that right now. Shadow is feeling a little raggedy anyway, right? Let's see, do I want to do? I wonder if I want to do. Interesting. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess that. This actually, I wonder if this. Value puzzles, my friends. Value puzzles. See, I love the read of that though. Those shadows in the front there, but I wonder if that's just taking too much artistic liberty there. It's a bit coincidental, right, that we don't have a cast shadow off this. Oh boy. See what I've done? I've done this to myself. Let's leave that alone for a bit here. I'm going to contemplate that. Okay, yeah, I like how this is coming along. Let's duplicate the AO there. Let's see, do we like that? That's a little strong. I think I'm actually liking the amount of AO happening there. Maybe we'll make our shadows a little darker. Just a bit. So we're going to end here, but just as a quick preview so you guys can see what's going to be happening at some point is we're going to be blocking in what the local value and color is of all these objects underneath our shadow pass. And we can do that because these are all separate layers with transparency going on. So let's say we wanted to make this head like a kind of a greenish marble or something. You can see we can do that, and interacts with all the rendering that we've done without any issues. Right, so we can change. This is really dark, right? We can go really dark. We can go to saturated with it. We can make the crown a different material, right? So this is this gives us a lot of power and control over our process. All right, so we'll leave it there, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you found some of this stuff fun to watch, and yeah, we'll be back again. I'll be back again Thursday, but of course there's content all throughout the week from other awesome mentors at CGS, so make sure you tune in. All different kinds of subjects, right? We've got animation and effects, industry talk. There's all kinds of cool stuff on the channel all throughout the week, so tune in for that. But I'll be back here again Thursday at the same time to continue with this demo rendering with logical layers. All right, and if you guys are interested in seeing some of my work, you can follow me on Instagram at artofty, ARTOFTY, and check out the school's content and our classes over at cgspectrum.com. All right, with that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.